Do I really have to do it? Yes. But it's my day off. Just finish the book already. Day drinking. Honestly, do you remember the last time you got day drunk while you were trying to shoot a video? Fine. Hey guys, it's Travis the Pagan Scholar here with part 2 of Strangers, Gods, and Monsters. Finally. So, as I said in the previous video, part 2 starts out with Hamlet's Ghosts, from Shakespeare to Joyce. I will be straight up with you guys. I have not read James Joyce. Well, I've read the letters that he sent to Nora, which are terrifying in their abandon. But I have read Shakespeare, and I actually wrote a paper over Hamlet in philosophy and tragic literature. It's really hard to actually pin down a definition of tragedy, but neither here nor there. So Kearney is actually discussing Hamlet because of the concepts of ghosts and memory. So in a subsection, mourning and memory, we get to discuss this really interesting interplay between self, other, and memory, ghosts, repression, things like that. Let me just read you something really quick from the book. There is memory and there is memory. First, there is so-called normal memory, in cases of pain or loss. This kind of memory, we are told, can be recalled through a process of mourning and maturation. It takes time, but it can be worked through. Second, there is memory that refuses to be so recalled and resists such therapeutic reworking. Instead, it insists on returning to us in the guise of an unconscious repressed. Some specter or monster rearing up from the mists of time. This is what the French call a revenant. Something that comes back precisely because it has been buried or concealed. The ghosts of Hamlet's father rising from the grave to summon his son epitomizes this second category, memory that petrifies remembrance. This I call traumatic or impossible memory. So we've got this concept of ghosts and memory, but why are we talking about that? We were talking about strangers, gods, and monsters. This is where hermeneutics comes into play. As discussed in a few previous videos, hermeneutics is the art of unpacking communication, of understanding what we are talking about. Kearney's hermeneutics focuses upon narrative. Narrative is Kearney's proposed way of overcoming why bad things happen to good people. Ultimately, to engage with a stranger, with an other, the best way to understand that communication and to be hospitable, in order to have hospitality instead of having hostility, which actually come from the same root word. So in narrative, we have this idea that, I don't know if what they're saying is actually what I'm understanding. It's, how do we know if what we're saying is actually getting through? In Hamlet, we've got the ghost, and the ghost is a repressed memory. There are things that have been left unsaid. There are communications that have never been fleshed out. Because of that miscommunication, this clash, there's no cohesive understanding. So this is where hermeneutics starts to say, if we can start to communicate, then we can start to solve the problem of why do bad things happen to good people. So ultimately, if we are to overcome the impossible memory, the immemorial, through communication, through unpacking, he does propose psychoanalysis, but then he kind of throws it out the window. But if we can start to work through these impossible repressed memories or fears, that memory can give way into mourning. However, mourning involves melancholy. So let's talk about melancholy. So Kearney starts off that section on melancholy with an interesting idea that the Western mentality has always characterized melancholy as a double standard, because everything can't be just one simple explanation. There has to be multiple ways of understanding it. He says that melancholy has always been understood as a god and a monster. In the sense that melancholy is a monster, it's an ailment that befalls, the humors. It's wallowing in your depressive states, and it's just the typical idea of melancholy, of being antisocial. However, in an elevated idea, melancholy then transforms into this very Renaissance idea of intellectually understanding the world around me, observing the woes of the world, and so I am melancholic. It's very, it's a precursor to existential nausea. You can kind of swing back and forth between these two ideas of melancholy, and there's also a middle ground, there's extremes, But the existentialist account of melancholy takes its form in nausea. In the German existentialists, you've got ein unheimlich, an uncanniness. So there's all these different ways of interpreting melancholy. Moving right along, melancholia, this quiet contemplative understanding that maybe it's not all sunshine and rainbows, it can then lead to the account of recollection. You are observed all the external things in the world that are melancholy, and so thus you turn inward. And this idea of unpacking memory to properly mourn it, which leads to melancholy, again leads us back to narrative. How do we understand our experiences now, not even with another person, but how do we understand our memories? And, what is the narrative that we are constructing on these memories? In these recollections, ultimately we arrive at the concept of, yes, being, existence, but also that of the ultimate standard, the sublime, but of God. Or Korra. No, not Avatar The Last Airbender or Legend of Korra. That would be amazing. But actually, Korra is even more badass. The first mention of Korra actually comes from Plato. It's a deep concept if Plato cannot define it. Plato really wrestles with the concept of Korra, and he's trying to describe it, and the best he can come up with is it's the primordial, I want to say essence, but it's not even essence. It's the receptacle, the mode, the nursemaid of becoming and change, but it's not a thing. It's a non-thing. But even to say it is a non-thing presupposes being. This is getting very metaphysical. So Korra is that which belongs to not belonging. It's so great. However, it's kind of set up almost in juxtaposition with any concept of deity. Korra is the liminal space of beginning in which time can take place, but it is also a no place. Anyways, I could go on forever, but I'm not going to. So what I'm saying is Korra is this thing that is a no thing. Couldn't help myself. Actually, hold on. Let's go with a better metaphor. So Kierkegaard is kind of like the grandfather of existentialism. He has the leap of faith in the dark night of the soul. So the leap of faith is ultimately towards the good, God, being, whatever. But in my own idea, let's say, if you're going to have this leap of faith, you have to have something that you're leaping over. And I believe, or I speculate, that Korra is the thing which one leaps over in the leap of faith. So if you're contemplating the universe, if you're melancholic and you're saying, where does all this come from? Narrative, task, deconstruction, all these things, eventually you're going to start drowning in solipsism, in postmodernism, in relativism, all of these things. And at the bottom of that abyss would be Korra. It would be the... see, it's so hard to talk about. It's so cool. Anyway, it's the thing which you would leap over towards whatever it is that you're leaping in your leap of faith. Be that towards God, be that towards being, be that towards the good, be that towards whatever you want. Korra is that which is not, ominously, but it is, in my understanding, the thing that one leaps over in their leap of faith during the dark night of the soul. Guys, I really can't rave enough about this chapter. It's so cool. It's like poetry. I was looking for a passage to cite to you, and Korra, let me reiterate my definition a little bit. He states that to a non-philosopher, Korra could be experienced as devastation, loss, tragedy, and he also juxtaposes it with Korra versus God, not versus, but Korra and God, are they two separate things that one would leap towards? Again, I think Korra is the thing that one leaps over, but Korra is different from God, and he even sets it up as Korra as, she, as her, but it is not the nocturnal mother, because Korra does not care. There is nothing maternal about Korra. Korra is the quintessential disinterest. It has this really heady, ineffable way of talking about terror. And so, anyways, let me read you, oh my gosh, it's so cool! Higher than the children of faith are the knights of Korra, who brave the long day's journey into never-ending night and never look back. Isn't that so cool? Anyways, yeah, okay. I've fangirled enough about Korra. All right, and to wrap things up in the very last chapter of the book, it's not necessarily an overview, it kind of is, but it's sort of his like final note on things. And actually, guys, it gets a little bit pagan. It's pretty cool. He discusses if we have wrestled with Korra, you know, if we settle with Korra, that's a very bleak place to stay. And so this is actually an argument for being, or, I mean, you could say God, you could say the good, but it's an argument against non-being, and non-being also implies the inability to communicate. It's, yes, an argument for being, for the good, for God, whatever you want to say, but it's also an argument for interpretation, that there is a way to navigate through all of these, you know, pitfalls of Korra and tragedy, of terror, of the monstrous, of the sublime. There is ultimately going to be a way to navigate through all of these things if we can actually focus on our communication. So I could have said that at the very beginning of the last video, like, what's this book about? Well, to overcome evil, we should just talk about it. Yep, yeah, anyways. But really, to unpack that concept, it's worth the time to really sit and dwell upon all of these things of how we arrive at interpretation. Okay. This is my review of Strangers, Gods, and Monsters. I am a philosophy nerd. I give this book a 10 out of 10. For people who are not well-versed in philosophy, I would give this book, I'm trying not to be favoritist, a 6.5 or a 7. I really want to say 7, but it's probably a 6.5. Just because the concepts are accessible, but the philosopher's game is to stand on the shoulders of giants and shoot at other giants. So there's a lot of, it's not necessarily name-dropping. Yes, it is. It's totally name-dropping. But there's a lot of references that are not going to be commonplace unless you've studied them. So if you haven't read a lot of philosophy, I would give this book like a 6.5. But those 6.5 points are amazing whenever you aren't wrestling with name-dropping and obscure references, because the concepts he unpacks are amazing. They're fantastic. And the way oh my gosh, it's like poetry, it's like song, it's lyric, it's beautiful. So I recommend this book. If you can find it used, get it used. It's an expensive book. It doesn't have that high of a rating if you're not into philosophy. So if you don't read this book, it's okay. It's not the end of the world. But I definitely think it's a primer to, you can look up the concepts that he's talking about in the book. So guys, I love this book. I think it's fantastic. Richard Kearney, if you're watching this, hi. Anyways, guys, all right, I have to start packing. Actually, my roommates are doing a lot of cleaning, and I need to help out because I live here too. As always, merry meet, merry part, and merry meet again.